What's up YouTube, this is Tessa5th and welcome back to another video. For today's video, I'm going to be reviewing one of Square Enix's many Final Fantasy titles, which is the beloved and iconic PlayStation 2 title, Final Fantasy X sequel that for some odd reason most of the fan base would prefer to be left in a closet and on fire while surrounded by multiple alligators, X-2. Before we get this review started, let me preface this review by saying this review has long been delayed. I was battling back and forth between making a video solely for X-2 and making a two-part video focusing on both FF10 and X-2. Then I sat down and thought about X's initial popularity back then and how X-2 to this day still doesn't get as much love as X, and what I want to showcase about games like X-2, which is not every game that might have been looked down upon or overlooked deserves such a treatment because it bears a negative stigma when it comes to sequels. Yes, in most cases, sequels tend to lack in carrying the same impact as its predecessors, aka they tend to suck, but there are sequels that do leave their own impact just as hard and in rarer cases, better than its predecessor. What does it leave X-2? I said it leaves X-2 in the party where it's not necessarily better than X. As a matter of fact, I would argue it's quite on par with X, but not without making its own impact. X-2 fast forwards 2 years into the future after the defeat of Sin in 10, with Yuna joined by fellow Final Fantasy X alumni and cousin Riku, as well as newcomer Pain, who along with Cid's airship forms a charismatic team called the Goldwings, a team of sphere hunters that travels across Spira collecting spheres that contains the memories of its original owner. Think of it like a supernatural Easter egg hunt, I guess. The most prominent sphere that carries the plot of X forward is the sphere Yuna canonically equips herself to, which is the Songstress sphere. Within the sphere is a memory of a man resembling a certain blitzball player known as Shuyin, who is in search for his lover Lyn, a summoner from Zanarkand who fought in the Machina War that predates both X and X-2's timeline, and in a quest to stop her from giving up her life fighting in a war instigated by Yevon. Shuyin pilots a massive Machina dubbed Vegnagun in order to stop the war, but is unsuccessful. This Machina of mass destruction, of course, threatens to destroy Spira once again, thanks to one of the leaders of Spira's warring factions becoming possessed by Shuyin's spirit, resulting in what I'm going to be dubbing these three ladies from now on, Spira's Angels, to take Vegnagun down. Given that I played Final Fantasy X about a year or two after it was originally released, and been alive on this burning rock called Earth long enough to witness Square re-release the Final Fantasy X X-2 HD remaster as many times as Skyrim, I've always known about X-2's existence, yet I rarely heard anything about the game from anybody, including friends who are more die-hard fans of the Final Fantasy series. Being an owner of the HD remaster myself, I promised myself after completing Final Fantasy X that I would follow up with a sequel this year to witness for myself after, I don't know, over 15 plus years, just what lies beyond this sequel's launcher. And the answer to that was lights, camera, microphone, and hit the 4 count. 2, 4, 6, 8. Yuna's hips can gyrate. 1, 3, 5, 7. Shake those hips and piss off Yevon. Cause her name is Yuna. Yeah. She saved the world. Yeah. And if you mess with her, what? She got her girls. I was in shock to see Yuna's sudden change from renowned Sin defeating High Summoner, daughter of renowned High Summoner who also defeated Sin, to pop sensation Uni Spears. From the opening sequence onwards, my mouth was left agape with how cheery, humorous, and silly the game is. Is the plot of the story on typical Final Fantasy sad hours? To some extent, but that part of the story is more on the back burner and minor to the journey you go on. This sequel was the perfect half to a game like Final Fantasy X, where much of its theme focused on death and how death is integral to Spira society. For one, the monsters in both games are called fiends, which are comprised of malicious dead souls. You call upon Aeons, who are formed by the joining of souls. Final Aeon is located in Zanarkand, a dreamlike city that has been dead for centuries, but the vision of it is kept alive by the souls of its dead citizens, and even meeting undead souls. Everything about Final Fantasy X drove home the theme that death is inevitable and is what makes the cycle of life a complete path. And here's where X-2 steps in. X-2 is a perfect sequel to me because it does the exact opposite of what X does in both its gameplay and in its core theme, while also complementing X's theme, which is X-2 is the celebration of life, the joy of living, the comfort of peace. Yes, this game is silly. Yes, the game has corny dialogue at times. Yes, its vibe is entirely different from X and is, dare I say, campy. But that's the point of X-2. And I am here to say, and if you're listening, by the way, you have my full permission to quote this video in my voice to anyone you know who doesn't like 10-2 or thinks 10-2 is dumb purely because the tone of 10-2 is very different from 10. Are you ready? Here we go. Every JRPG does not have to be sad as Every JRPG does not have to be an edgelord's fantasy and being desolate and constraining us under a seemingly 24-hour time limit to save the world, or else your mama is about to die. Like 10-2, JRPGs can still have a serious plot at its core while covering its shell with a more lighthearted comedic beat if done correctly. Am I saying that 10-2 is perfect? Of course not. It still has its flaws, which will be discussed later in the critique section, but overall I found it to be a solid game where the developers intentionally made it much more comedic than its darker predecessor. And I want to remind people that sequels like these are done like that intentionally, purposely designed that way. If Final Fantasy X was a constant, never-ending reminder that Spira is on the verge of being destroyed, then why wouldn't 10-2 be a constant, never-ending reminder that Spira is free from that cycle of despair? That is what sequels are supposed to do. Reinvent the central story and characters of the original media. Expand what we know of Spira from 10 and present us with a new challenge or a new question, which is, what will Spira do now that is freed from sin? And that's exactly what 10-2 does, giving us those answers now that we are inhabiting a sinless world. As I journeyed throughout the game, I was pleased to see that as you progress, you see the changes Sin's defeat brings all across Spira. As you interact with NPCs among the various locations, the state of Spira is now in this limbo where there are factions competing to become the new power in command that its Spira no longer follows the teachings of Yevon. And these three factions are the Youth League, New Yevon, which is pretty much all of the assholes from the teachings of Yevon and 10 that still kind of follow Yevon, but then they're kind of like, we want to appeal to the younger crowd. They're kind of like that awkward youth pastor that's kind of cool because he stays up late on Saturdays, but like he stays up late on Saturdays because he was playing like Scrabble all night long. And now that Machina is no longer outlawed in Spira, the Al Beds have risen to use Machina to ease life in Spira, which led to them forming their own faction, the Machine Faction. But now I'm going to go beyond reiterating the stark contrast of 10 and 10-2 through the world of Spira itself and prove to you how this stark contrast is also reflected within the main character, Yuna. Underneath and between the silliness of 10-2's dialogue lies the cracked reality of how Yuna feels. What solidified this belief for me was the moment in 10, before arriving in Zanarkand, Yuna records what she wants to be her final words left for her summoners if she were to defeat Sin, meaning she was well aware that she would have to die. Almost like a will. Although it's not an actual will she recorded, this recording does share some traits with a will that we can all agree upon. 1. Wills are usually written by someone who knows that their end is nearing, and they're usually an older person. 2. Wills are usually an extension of what the author feels, believes, wishes, wants, and so forth before passing on into the next life. A moment of reflection about the life they've journeyed. Going back to Yuna, something that I believe a lot of people tend to forget is that in 10, she was only 16 years old, and in 10-2, she's 18. To hear Yuna at the same age as an American 10th or 11th grader leave final words should put into perspective the gravity of Sin's existence. Yuna was prepared to sacrifice her personal wishes and dreams in order to become a summoner. To defeat Sin not because she wants to do it, but because it needs to be done. Final Fantasy X was a game where Yuna became what Spira needed. 10-2 is a game where Yuna became what Yuna wanted. She has moments in 10-2 where she wants to reject her title as High Summoner whenever someone refers to her as such, or expresses rejection for the celebrity status her triumph over Sin has given her in Spira. Remember in 10 where a recurring slogan amongst the main cast was some of them stating, "This is my story"? Well, 10-2 is Yuna's story. 10-2 is to show us a Yuna who is venturing into the life she would have wanted, and a life she has now chosen for herself instead of for the greater good. And when you extend these concepts to outside of Yuna, it becomes more than just a game where Spira is freed from sin. Spira is freed from needing to be saved. Spira is now free to do and live however they want. Even the summoners who make a cameo in 10-2 are now trying to adapt to this new Spira where summoners are no longer needed. Seeing Yuna in 10-2 where she's more outgoing and adventurous now, while still at times displaying her shyness and hesitancy, shows that we are witnessing her in the middle of growing as a person herself, finding herself in a world where she no longer needs to be a summoner, can be be a chef if she wants to, or an astronaut. Wait, do they have astronauts in Final Fantasy universe? You get the point. This particular development with Yuna and a few other characters in Ten 2 was what really made me realize that underneath, Ten 2 is a game where the immediate threat is Vegnagun, but the real threat is the one that will continue to exist after all the Vegnaguns and monsters are slain, and that is figuring out how to move on. How to steadily navigate life after a monumental event, whether it's saving the world or losing someone dear to you. The struggle of finding a new purpose, a new goal, a new drive in the hopes you don't experience that loss again, or you see a better outcome at the end of it. But Yuna also finds a solution towards the struggle of moving on, and that is by not moving on. She realizes she doesn't have to get rid of the memories with Tidus. They can still be a part of her. They don't have to be let go. They don't have to be cast aside. She can still continue to go forth on her journey to find herself while still honoring and protecting and withholding these precious memories inside of her. What I find interesting about Ten 2's gameplay is that despite Ten 2 sharing the same assets as 10, the locations, combat, and music in Ten 2 stands on its own from 10, and it does so by supporting the themes and feelings that Ten 2 uses to differentiate itself from 10. Starting with location, Cid's airship is a major component for traveling across the Land of Spirits to visit the same places in 10, and allows the player freedom to either tackle on locations that are deemed hotspots, which means that these are the locations that have the main mission, or going to places outside of those labeled hotspots to complete side missions. Whether you intend to or not, you're going to find yourself curious about the status of some of these areas in a post-Sin world, and the game encourages you to do so with the addition of side missions, which are usually given by the inhabitants of these cities. The reward for doing these side missions are typically battle items with the occasional dress sphere, but what I found enjoyable in traveling to all of the locations and interacting with the NPCs is noticing that people are traveling more on the roads now. And get this, even adopting those dang on evil owl bad machinery to make traveling more efficient, and instead of constantly toiling over Sin's luring presence, are now expressing optimism about what they want to accomplish in life. But it's not just the civilians who go through a degree of development, but some of the areas themselves. But the location I really want to delve into is Zanarkand. What was once a city that served as the final key to defeating Sin is now in Ten 2 a mere tourist attraction riddled with fireflies. It was devastating to see such an iconic city like Zanarkand become reduced to an afterthought, but what is the word for today's video? Intentional. As in, out of all the locations in Ten 2, it makes sense that Zanarkand would intentionally be given such a demoted status. In Ten 2, Zanarkand is stripped of much of its prominence now that Sin is gone, and we should actually be happy that it is. Zanarkand's wish has been to be freed from constantly summoning the illusion of what Zanarkand once was. But one interesting point I enjoyed about Zanarkand being a mere tourist attraction is that the people visiting Zanarkand admire it for what it was in an era where it no longer has significance in Spira. This is the game's way of allowing the story of 10 to just move on, to let Zanarkand be the last remnant, no, not that last remnant of Spira's traumatizing past. As far as music, even the soundtrack of this game expresses the feeling of moving on. The soundtrack has less traditional orchestral pieces at the forefront, outside of the typical boss battles and main battle themes that Final Fantasy will never fail to provide a dramatic orchestral piece for. But for the most part, this game modernizes itself with J-pop, rock, funk, hip-hop, and more alternative genre influences that enforces the narrative of living in a new era. For starters, the theme songs of all three ladies are upbeat, funktastic jams that you can't help but shake your bubble butt to, or nod your head along throughout your playthrough that defines their personalities. Going back to Zanarkand, let's take Zanarkand's ruins into account when it comes to showing story progression in music sometimes. Into Zanarkand, the piano is the featured instrument that starts the song and carries the melody forward. However, in Zanarkand's ruins, the piano only appears in the bridge, and instead of carrying the melody along, the piano has a solo instead. Solos within a piece of music usually tends to give musicians the opportunity to express themselves within the parameters of a particular song's chord structure. And the way the piano expresses itself with a big glissando in the middle of its solo does give this piano solo the feeling of liberation, while repeated notes and alternations give the sense of assurance. Meaning, Zanarkand has found freedom in his inexistence and can finally rest peacefully in his inexistence. Zanarkand Ruins isn't the only song with some meaningful substance in this game. 1000 Words is a prominent song used in the game to move the story forward. After seeing that the Youth League and New Yevon are still beefing with one another, as the threat of Vegnagun is still plaguing Spira, Yuna decides to pin the emotions of Lyn that she's able to feel through the dress sphere she has equipped it. While in the background, Lyn's memories are broadcast to the people watching Yuna sing, and shows the events that transpired during the Machina War, with Shuyan operating Vegnagun and Lyn trying to stop him before they are ultimately gunned down together. It is thanks to this song and Lyn's memory that both New Yevon and the Youth League realize that when it comes to war, neither side benefits, both sides lose. And you gotta love the power of pop and love prevailing over war and hatred. And your voice didn't crack not once. Great job, pop sensation Uni Spears. The combat in this game is vastly different from 10. For one, there is no sphere grids to complete in order to gain stat bonuses and new moves. Instead, in order to unlock new moves, you must perform the base moves within each dress sphere that you gain for a required amount of time before more are unlocked. As for stats, they are automatically gained through leveling, and instead of sphere grids, there are garment grids. Yeah. Throughout the game, the Gold Wings collect dress spheres, which are sphere grids that contain the memories of the owner inside of them, and grants whoever obtained it the outfit and powers of their particular sphere. The songstress, as well as a bunch of other outfits like Samurai, Black Mage, White Mage, and so forth, have their own unique perks, and depending on which character you equip them to, sometimes the abilities will vary between the three ladies. When you equip these dress spheres onto a garment grid, it allows you during battle to switch into different outfits, and depending on the size of the garment grid, switching will grant you special perks. Downside to this, which I did not actually enjoy about the combat, is that in order to get these perks, you must switch, which means every single time you enter into a battle, you have to switch into different outfits if you want those perks. There are garment grids that have an easy 2 slot, or switching to one class technically counts as completing that grid, but there are some garment grids that are complex with having maybe 4 to 6 nodes, but in order to get those perks, you have to navigate through 4 to 6 different jobs within one battle. Along with capturing fiends and allowing them to join your party though, I appreciate the freedom the combat system does offer, but speaking personally, the ATB style of combat was always difficult for me to fully grasp, so I did have a bit of a difficult time fighting in this game until I got the ultimate dress spheres. My main critique for 10-2 has to do with chapter locking. If you miss certain side missions or certain dress spheres that can only be attained by visiting other locations outside of the main mission, then your only method of re-obtaining that item or sphere is merely by replaying the game. Granted, the length of the game is arguably short since it is purposely designed to be replayed, but I've never really been someone who replays a game unless it furthers the story. So when I realized that I missed obtaining Pain's ultimate dress sphere because I had to talk to this tree man 4 times before progressing past chapter 2, to say that I was annoyed is a big understatement. Another annoyance that I have with this game is the fact that it has 5 different endings. The fact that it has 5 different endings made me want to stab a blitzball. But it's not a game having multiple endings that's a problem for me. It's when most of these endings seem sort of obscure to obtain. And dare I say that some of these endings just seemed unnecessary to add. A bad and perfect ending, I'm totally fine with that. That's cool. As far as different endings, because there are stipulations that are once again chapter locked, that doesn't entice me enough to want to obtain those endings. And it doesn't come from a place of laziness, especially as this is coming from someone who has completed all 5 endings for both Nier games. Rather, I say with much honesty, despite how much I enjoyed playing 10-2, there's nothing striking enough about 10-2's story that compels me to want to replay it, nor see it continue, to be honest. I ended up receiving the sad ending, where Tidus pulls a Patrick Swayze and hugs Yuna from behind once she returns to the far plane after defeating Vegnagun. Feeling Tidus' soul embrace her, Yuna leaves her final words to Tidus, thanking him for following her throughout her journey, and with the moment of grief and finally accepts his death, moves on. For a sad ending, it puts a perfect ending to the character development Yuna experiences throughout the game, and I was satisfied with the ending. But I guess to Square Enix, that ending didn't scream profitable, because one perfect ending later, Tidus is a real boy now, all of Yuna's character development is at the bottom of a dumpster with Wakka's racism, and thanks to the included bonus audio story titled Will, someone revives Sin, thus the ending to 10 joins Yuna's character development, Wakka's racism, and Seymour's forehead veins in the garbage. But hey, at least thanks to the perfect ending, we get a rumored 10-3 that's reportedly been written and possibly on the back burner until all of Final Fantasy VII Remake has been released. You gotta love it when that corporate greed just turns it up a notch. But regardless of matters, 10-2 is a game worth a playthrough, and if you are someone who is used to the ATB combat system, you might appreciate what the combat system offers more than what I did, on top of 10-2's lighthearted approach to its plot. But with that being said, that wraps up this review video for Final Fantasy X-2. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to click on that subscribe button and click on the notification bell so that you can be informed when the next video drops on this channel. But until the next video, you already know what I'm about to say. Stay safe, stay healthy, peace.